You probably think of tea as a very British thing, and you'd be right. But what you might not know is that this humble little leaf nearly bankrupted Britain, sparked a war with China, and may have accidentally caused the American Revolution. Not bad for a hot drink. Now, tea didn't always belong to the British. For most of its history, it was exclusively Chinese. And the Chinese, quite reasonably, intended to keep it that way. Tea had been drunk in China for well over 1,000 years before a European so much as laid eyes on it. Legend has it that Emperor Shennong discovered it entirely by accident in 2737 BC, when a few leaves drifted into his boiling water. Whether or not that's true, by the time the Tang dynasty rolled around, tea was already deeply embedded in Chinese culture. Rituals, poetry, the works. So how did it end up in Britain? Well, blame the Portuguese. They were the first Europeans to establish serious trade routes with China in the early 1500s. And it wasn't long before tea made its way back to Lisbon. From there, it crept across Europe, arriving in England sometime in the mid-1600s, at which point it was expensive, exotic, and therefore immediately fashionable. The real turning point came in 1662, when King Charles II married the Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza. Catherine was, among other things, an absolute tea fanatic, and she brought her habit with her to the English court. Almost overnight, drinking tea went from mildly interesting foreign curiosity to the single most sophisticated thing a person could do with a cup. Naturally, everyone wanted in. The problem, and there's always a problem, was that all of this tea was coming from China, and China wasn't exactly accepting British pounds. The Chinese Empire was, at this point, the wealthiest and most self-sufficient civilization on Earth. They didn't need anything Britain had to offer. What they did accept, however, was silver, so Britain paid in silver. Lots of it. By the mid-1700s, the British were consuming around 40 million pounds of tea per year, and hemorrhaging silver to pay for every last ounce of it. The East India Company, which handled most of this trade, was essentially running a very expensive one-way street. Something had to give, and that something was opium. The East India Company, never ones to let a moral quandary slow down a profit margin, began growing opium in India and smuggling it into China in enormous quantities. The Chinese government was, understandably, furious. Emperor Qianlong had already famously told King George III that China had absolutely no interest in British goods whatsoever, a letter that remains one of history's most elegant diplomatic rejections. But the opium kept coming. The silver started flowing back the other way, and when China eventually tried to put a stop to it, Britain responded with gunboats. The resulting opium wars of the 1840s forced China to open its ports and hand over Hong Kong, all in a rather roundabout way because the British couldn't stop drinking tea. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, tea had been causing a different kind of trouble entirely. You see, Britain had been taxing its American colonies on imported tea, because if there's one thing the British loved almost as much as tea, it was taxing people for it. In 1773, a group of rather fed-up colonists in Boston decided they'd had enough, dressed themselves up as Mohawk Indians, and threw an entire shipment of East India Company tea into Boston Harbor. The Boston Tea Party, as it became known, is considered one of the key catalysts of the American Revolution, which means that in a very real sense, tea didn't just fuel the British Empire, it also helped break it apart. Of course, the British being the British, none of this put them off their cuppa in the slightest. If anything, tea consumption only increased. By the Victorian era, It had filtered down from the aristocracy to every level of society. Workers drank it, soldiers drank it, the navy ran on it. During the Second World War, Churchill's government classified tea as an essential wartime supply, rationing it carefully and distributing it to keep morale from collapsing entirely. Tea, in short, had gone from a fashionable foreign luxury to the single most important beverage in the history of British civilization, shaping its trade routes, its wars, its colonies, and its culture in ways that a Portuguese sailor in 1500 could never possibly have imagined. And the Chinese emperor who sent that rather snooty letter to King George, his empire collapsed less than a century later. All of which goes to show that you should never underestimate a good cup of tea, or the lengths an empire will go to in order to keep the kettle on. Well, my friends, I hope that's given you something to think about next time you're waiting for the water to boil. If it did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, because here at Obscura Explained, we'll keep serving up history's most steeped and surprisingly consequential episodes, one cup at a time. We'll see each other again soon for the next imperially infused installment of Obscura Explained.